Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, I have somebody on the show today who is going to help us with something that's going to advance your prospects further down the sales cycle and hopefully close them. And it's all based in conversations, but not in the way that you think. Eric Burgess is actually the CEO of an organization that helps to make things more clear so those conversations can happen. And he's going to get into that in a second. And so the name of his company is called BlueLeap. And I had the opportunity to meet Eric probably about a year and a half ago when we had a discussion about some of these technologies that currently exist out there. And he does a lot of work with B2C organizations. However, what we know is happening is that we have the opportunity as digital marketers to take what has been successful in the B2C world and start to leverage more and more of those things in the B2B world. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. We appreciate you having me today.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Now, if you could give people a little bit of a background about, B2B digital marketing and your connection to it and how your expertise is going to impact a B2B digital marketer today.
Sure. I think you kind of talked about it already even. So if you think of my background, I've worked for years in, with large global companies, in not just in the marketing space, but the outbound call center space, sales, as well as the customer support space. And, I think what's happening is we're seeing communication channels merge. People are getting used to certain ways to communicate, and it's spilling over, if you will, into their business life from their personal life, right? And you can kind of think about it a little bit like, years ago, call centers were call centers because people use phones. And that's just not really kind of the way it is anymore. Even in their personal life, people are doodling, they're taking pictures, they're doing voice snippets, they're taking pictures of their food and sending it to their friends. I mean, this is all digital conversations that are happening. And so, the way we look at it is it's not just happening on the consumer side or when businesses deal with their customers, but it's also happening on the B2B side as well, because your B2B people that you're marketing to are the same people that are communicating with pictures, snippets, videos, and that kind of stuff with their friends. So we always feel that you ought to really be talking to your customers or your potential customers the way friends do.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. And so when you start talking about, driving digital conversations and doing it digitally, even when I start thinking about a long sales cycle, for a lot of the people that have to support that, that listen to the podcast, it isn't oftentimes just one person that's being interacted with. Sometimes it's several different team members. There's a whole lot of complexity that can go into, a B2B sale. So when I start thinking about that and how most organizations approach it, it's typically just one contact, a lead, and then it doesn't necessarily go down any particular path. So can you give us some visibility and understanding into what a conversational communication path might look like for a B2B digital marketer?
Sure. So, I think to some extent the bread and butter of it really is somewhat the same. In other words, you start trying to do marketing qualified leads, right? You're trying to qualify your lead from a marketing standpoint. So are they reading your content? Is this prospect coming to your site? And with the hope of, can you get this person to the point where they're willing to do kind of a discovery call with the sales team, right? But the way what we have now, though, is we really have the ability when we're marketing to and nurturing that B2B lead to start off in the same, as I said, the typical same way. Maybe it's an email touch, maybe it's something like that. Maybe they've read some of your content, but then we can bring in videos, images, messaging, other things to kind of draw your prospect in to the way the way they're typically used to communicate. And what we're seeing when you do that is the pipeline sales cycles shorten and throughput improves, right? So as we're doing that nurturing campaign, we try to get focused on how can we nurture in an interactive and more conversational way versus just pure static emails or things like that. The idea is we want to get very, very personal with our customers and our prospects, so they're comfortable enough and they eventually purchase something from us.
Okay, so then for me, as you're talking, I start thinking about account-based marketing. I start thinking about marketing automations, and I start thinking about all of that. So how is what you're seeing and what you do with your expertise make all of that work better?
So in terms of marketing automation, I tend to think most people probably have the concept of marketing automation is that we're sending out emails, right? I mean, that's been the traditional feel of it, if you will. We're engaging people with emails. We're hoping they'll respond to those emails. Maybe we're asking them questions and things like that about those emails. But it's for us, it's a little more than that. We look at it as not just engaging people with emails, but how are we going to engage them in an interactive way to get them to respond and give us information? I mean, what we're trying to really understand is what's their behavior, right? What's their behavior as it relates to our content and the information we're providing? And then how are we interpreting that behavior and mapping that back to our sales process, right? And our marketing qualification process. Because remember, it's not so much the point about how we feel about our processes. It's how our customer or our prospects feel about our processes, right? And so, because of that, in terms of the way we're viewing marketing automation, we're going to we try to add more interactive components to it. Maybe it's sending information over messaging channels. Maybe it's bringing people in for a group discussion in a Facebook group, whatever it is to bring people together or interact with you real time so you can continue to drive that prospect through the decision-making process to the point where they're ready to make a decision for their business.
Okay. So then I would dare to say when you start thinking about that whole, for better use of words, the journey that prospects are going through, I think there's some important elements that you're really alluding to is that there has to be data points along the way to help you understand where you may need to make adjustments or where you need to make maybe an elimination of a particular, aspect of it, and those are possible acceleration points, right? So what I hear a lot is that people have access to analytics, but they don't use the analytics. So when you start talking about clients that you're working with, what are they doing with the analytics that's going to differentiate them from everyone else?
So, one thing we try to do with analytics, or basically even help our customers do, is because our product really kind of works in the interaction layer. So we're a conversational component, whether it's support or marketing or whatever. We're a conversational support component of the digital journey, and what we're trying to do is we're recording behaviors, okay, around that conversation. We're trying to figure out how fast they're responding because there's insight into that, right? Maybe they're not responding quickly. How fast they're going to consume our videos or our images, or how they're interacting with maybe their peers. A lot of companies can track, are they sharing their emails internally, or others opening emails, things like that. We can do the same thing with messaging and SMSs and other digital faster communication mechanisms. And those typically will go to some sort of data lake. Okay, the customers that I think are really paying attention to how consumers are not just conversing, but the behaviors. When I say consumers, I mean business consumers are behaving with and interacting with that digital journey you're helping them through. When they get focused on these are the toll gates we have in place to verify this journey is happening, and here are the insights we expect. When I see customers do that, that does two things. One, it takes the emotion out of it. So if I have specific toll gates in place that I'm tracking, it's not going to be left up to me or, I'm the marketer. I think everybody's a valid lead, right? They're not. And, but the other thing it's going to do is really help us, like you said, it's disqualify as much as qualify. And we'll start to see common behaviors among people, and we can start to also build behavior profiles within our data lake and our analytics system, so we can get predictive, right? And the companies that are getting predictive, that are using analytics to drive decision making, that kind of thing, those companies that we work with tend to see leaner pipelines. We tend to see more, but they're a little bit more leaner, but they're realistic. And now an organization on the marketing side, the sales side, and the CEO can make decisions around that, right? Because they can trust the data coming in, they can trust where somebody is in the process, and they also understand that we can expect things to close, and here's how they will close. So that kind of settles down and takes a lot of ambiguity out of. And I shouldn't say ambiguous, it's also just emotional, wishful thinking out of how we're going to manage that, that pipeline and that customer through their journey to a buy.
Well, I think what you're mentioning right there is one of the things that I see as a major bone of contention. I mean, I even find it with my own clients, right? Is that they're not quite aware of all the nuance and all of the moving parts and components and all of this, automation, and they don't really get into that and don't understand it, and they shouldn't.
Right.
Start injecting all of their emotional feelings into it, like, hey, I wouldn't do that, or hey, I don't like that, or hey, but then ultimately it's the data that says, that's not the important point here, right? It's whether or not.
No, I mean you're exactly right, and I work with companies and even with our own, right? I can tell when we're, somebody said, I think years ago, there was a book called "Hope Is Not a Strategy," and it's really not. But we need to. I think though the thing we can do today is we can build that customer journey such that it's never going to be completely void of emotion. Okay, it's just not. But we can build it such that it can challenge us. It will challenge each and every lead, and then hopefully sales qualified opportunity that comes into our pipeline. And it will force us, as you said, to disqualify. Because quite frankly, in my experience, even when I was doing heavy duty, making phone calls and knocking on doors, disqualification is probably even more important than qualification.
Yeah, definitely apathy you want to eliminate. I either want to yes or I want to no. So that
right, as fast as possible.
Okay, so when I start thinking about everything that you had talked about and everything that you've touched and all the experiences that you've had, I mean, it's been everything from the support side to the marketing side to the sales side. I mean, there's a lot of different elements and aspects. Also, we've had a massive, shift and acceleration in a lot of these technologies. Before we started recording, we talked about artificial intelligence and all of that.
Right.
But when I start thinking about where you yourself kind of have a little bit of sparkle and a passion in all of this, where is it?
What my passion is really helping customers take some of, look at their business process and use our application to help automate some of it. So it's taking some of the manual rigmarole, if you will, out of inbound and outbound calling processes. Okay. And, a lot of people have talked about, RPA, robotic automation, process automation, things like that as being, okay, we're going to automate everything, right? And we're just going to have a lights out room where people will call in, your voice will be translated and transcribed, and then we'll do stuff. And that's just not going to happen. You need people. People buy from people. People don't buy from, even if you're buying from at the Apple store, right? You're still, you still deal with people from Apple all the time. And so because of that, we think that it's never going to just completely be automated, but there are ways to help the agent. There are ways to help the company. There are ways to help the marketers get through that. And that when it looks at AI, that involves things like sentiment analysis, right? We do a lot of that, looking at sentiment as it's changing during the email process and the chat process and the phone call process and anything else. If we see sentiment changing, how do we get it back on the rails? Right? If something's going off the rails, how do we get it back on? So we're using AI strategically, not as a silver bullet, not as a fix-all, not as 100% automation capability, but we're using it strategically to help agents and business people, make better decisions.
Well, and you may have answered my next question, because I always want to look at some things that are just kind of getting blown out of proportion and seem to be, glamorized and all that. So what do you think right now is being overrated?
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting. So, I do think AI is somewhat overrated. It's misunderstood. It's been written about. It's the promise of it's been written a lot about it, but I haven't seen many proof points. I think one of the reasons is because with AI, it really does highlight garbage in, garbage out. If your data is not clean, if it's not good, if it's not collected well, if it's not scrubbed, it's not going to give you, and you're just not going to be able to operate using AI, right? I mean, that a lot of people, you've heard over the years, right? We've got to scrub our data. I mean, anytime you go into a CRM, any company CRM, they'll say, we've got to scrub our data, right? With AI, that magnifies that problem by 10. And so when I listen to people who are actually the people coding the AIs and things like that, when I listen to these engineer guys that I'm not near as smart as, one of their main issues they say stands in the way of companies really realizing some of the promises of AI is dirty data.
Well, even when you say that, and when I start thinking about just the past 10 years of business in general,
right,
rapid acceleration of dirty data is increasing at an ever increasing rate.
Oh, it's just unbelievable. And it's really started out. I think it started out with companies are, a lot of times organizations are chasing that next project. They're trying to get the next thing checked off the list. And while it's a laudable goal, sometimes what happens is we forget to do things like field level validation, the boring stuff, right? The boring stuff that makes our lives easier. And I hate to sound like a data person because I just, I don't like hearing from data people either that you have to slow down, but sometimes you do. And so, having that, there's a cultural shift that needs to happen in organizations around their data to really make AI really sing and hum, if you will. The other thing that I think needs to happen too is organizations still are very siloed. Even in the call center, where you would think that everybody comes in a queue and then we peel them off to the right. No, I mean, you've got a group doing chat over here. You got a group in the other corner answering emails. You got a group doing something over here that's for another department. And by the way, we're not going to share all the contact information. I mean, there's all kinds of silos that have been built. And those silos have to really come down. And that is one thing our application does, is it kind of, we think of ourselves almost as an orchestrator of data and of process, if you will. But those need to come down for really organizations to, see true benefit from AI. So while, look, AI works. In a perfect world, it works. Man, if all my data was perfect, if all my business processes were perfect, I'd be in good shape.
For sure. Okay, and then again, you probably foreshadowed again, because the next question I want to ask is, how do I potentially stand out? How do I make a difference? How do I add more value to my organization? How do I, advance my career when it comes to being a deep B2B digital marketer? So where is the opportunity to be that disruptor that's going to make a difference?
Well, I think B2B marketers need to be, need to take risks. We need to take risks. We need to try different channels. We need to not assume that email is the only way to go, right? We need to assume that people that people want to talk to businesses, again, just like they talk to their friends. And I really actually truly believe that. So I just think it's, when you look at the idea of, am I going to sit there and go through my email box, or would I rather just, doodle on my, the last picture I took and tell you what I'm interested in? I mean, I think that's the kind of interaction that's going to happen. It's the line between personal and business, as you can see right behind me in my, my condo, is especially with COVID, it is done. There is very little. And if you think about this too, I mean, even when we're, even before COVID, people spend, I think, what is it, 60 to 70% of the people out there with smartphones, the last 15 minutes in a day, they're on it. And the first thing in the morning, they're on it. And that's just not, I mean, that's, first of all, that's huge engagement. So that's good for us marketers, because we know what the behavior is. But secondly, you have to hit it with the things they want to engage with, right? So I think taking risks, trying different channels, try that video, see if they'll interact, send a step-by-step video on how your product works. Do some interaction where somebody can click on fields and ask questions and all that. Engage them, with something, almost, I know it's digital, but almost physical. And once you do that, you bring them into the conversation. And then once they're in the conversation, you got them, and you can kind of drive them down that process. So what I would encourage all marketers to do is take risks, try new things, stop, just being the same old boring email sender is just, I just don't think it's going to be enough to differentiate you as much at this point in time. It's not going to get you noticed. It's not going to kind of get you over the finish line.
Well, I think that's a great point. I mean, I find myself, and we're doing more and more work in interactive video design, and we have a system that allows what you're talking about to happen, is people are engaging with a video, and then we can actually take responses, and we can collect that, and we can collect information.
Right.
All that goes into what are they looking at? How did they engage with it? All of those things. And I think you're right. I mean, we can't keep pushing. We have to start looking at the conversational component, which is why I wanted to have you on the show. Okay. So now, and just
to add to that, Jim, I mean, even again, I'm noticing, even with companies that typically do a lot of their B2B, but they're doing the shows, right? Where are the shows going now? They're going on Zoom, right? And I have seen, and when you're in those shows, it's, they're polling the audience, right? What is this important to you? Is this it? I mean, what is that? That's a conversation, right? So again, I do think that many companies have responded well to COVID, and especially the people that did, face-to-face group meetings, because they had to, and it forced them to get creative digitally, and they have.
Out of scarcity, we must.
Exactly right.
Okay, so one of the things that we always have to contend with is constraints in regards to the resources that we have available to us. And so, if I'm looking at where I am today, what do I need to do as a B2B digital marketer to consider where I might reallocate? What should I take away from and put into? And again, you may have already answered this a little bit when you started talking about the whole email thing. But what specifically, if I was to take away from something, where would I put it?
So I said earlier, take risks. So I'll give you some risks. Okay. So I would move some into push marketing into the messaging spaces. Okay. Apple's got Apple Business now, right? People are going to start to get on that. If you market to companies that perhaps might be based in other countries, messaging apps like WeChat, WhatsApp, Facebook, I wouldn't say Facebook Messenger, but WeChat, Line, Viber, all of these applications tend to be country specific. So China will have WeChat, Line is going to be Japan. And the interesting thing is when business people travel with their phone, they don't change the app they're using, the messaging app, right? So if they're using, when people come from China to here, they're going to use WeChat, they're going to keep using it. If you're coming from Japan and you're coming here or vice versa, whatever, if you're used to using that app, you're going to keep it. So I really think that B2B marketers should look at some of the usage and the statistics around some of those apps and see if that makes sense. I think more and more businesses are getting on there. The other thing that I'm seeing too is I've seen this, and I think this should be of note. Digital B2B marketers are advertising to gamers now, because as I said, the millennials, 35 and 35, 36, 37, what have they done all their lives? They played video games. So, I watch that very closely. I mean, my kids play Fortnite, they do other things online. I mean, I watch that very much. I think people are just starting to take advantage of it. But to me, that's a huge opportunity to go in there and really profile out, because you'll see that the gamers, people that are on some of these games are people working for companies that are buying stuff. So, all of those types of, the mobile gaming advertisement, things like that. I mean, when you even look at the numbers, they're going through the roof. And some of these games have figured out how to get the players to listen to some of these 30, 45-second conversations. And they are having an impact. I mean, I'm actually seeing the number of companies that are using that as a channel increase. So I think there's a big opportunity to continue that. So I would move some of my budget in that category as well. Again, I'm not saying, I'm not guaranteeing anything, but I am saying that it's a risk, but it's getting safer and safer all the time, because I'm seeing all kinds of, even on Twitch and other of these outlets where other gamers watch gamers play. I would have thought in a million years, 10 years ago, I'd have just said, if somebody said, well, I'm going to create Twitch. Well, why? Because we're watching other people play games. Well, who would want to do that? That's like more, that just shows you how out of it I am. And, interestingly, who was on Twitch the other day, I'm sitting there, I'm watching it with my kid, State Farm. Now, it is a B2C, but hey, the point is, this is a traditional industry. I mean, you can't get more traditional than insurance, and they're on Twitch now.
I think that's a great point. Open up your mind, open up your perspectives. Okay, so the other thing I'd like to look at is, hey, take off all the guardrails, right? So we have unlimited budget, unlimited resources. We can do whatever the heck we wanted to. Where would you spend that effort?
So, I think, so I don't think you can just let go of the bread and butter. So I think you still got to continue to do basic block and tackling. Okay. And that could be email, content, pay-per-click, whatever. I just don't, you can't ignore that. But you can add and add, juicy layers, if you will, to the interaction. And those can be, and I would spend more on things like you even spoke about, some of the interactive videos. I think podcasts are helpful. I think anytime, especially in a B2B sense, when you're building content with the idea that your content's going to help somebody, but it might not necessarily benefit you immediately, right? You're doing it to actually help your fellow person. That goes a long way. Even when I'm being sold as a business, and somebody said, "Hey, I've taken a look at your website. I've done my homework on you. I understand you," right? Those kind of interactions mean a lot. And so I would add budget to that. I would do things like have people, if you have companies that you really want to target, do things for them so they understand that they're important to you, even before you've necessarily, and the same with an industry, right? Even before you've necessarily closed a given account, but you're still thinking and acting and building content that that your personas would want, right? And so I think, I would add budget to research and do other things so we can personalize the interactions that we're doing with businesses, because just because they're businesses doesn't mean they don't want to have personal interactions. And then I'd also do things, as you said, the videos, the ways to engage the customer over messaging channels or apps, or even in groups, even in online groups, to where you can bring some of your people together and have them discuss industry issues, things like that. I would put more budget to that. In fact, I would probably assume that a lot of the face-to-face kind of stuff this year will continue to be slow, right? And this will just be the way people will prefer to do it, right? It's just safer at this point. So, so building channels in ways to take advantage of that is another way I would. It's another place I would spend my money. And interestingly enough, just as a little tidbit, I've talked to a lot of marketers that say it's actually easier to get a hold of people right now, because a lot of them are, as you can see, they go out jogging in the morning and then they're taking their shower and they're sitting in front of their desk. Right. So instead of being on airplanes, there's really no excuse. And people start, interacting.
That's very true. Okay. So let's kind of, pull, like you said, kind of step back and look at all this and make it easy for us to, focus. And what we do, the way we do that is we ask, what should I be asking? Right. And so for a B2B digital marketer, what should they be asking themselves right now?
So I always think, I always spend a lot of time, dreaming about the personas a little bit, right? Putting myself in somebody else's shoe, empathizing, right? What are they going through? What are the things they're reading? What are they thinking about? What are their problems, right? I just think there's just nothing. I mean, people complain about, yes, I have my personas, blah, blah. Well, guess what? After COVID, your personas they're not valid. You got to go back through and do, you got to go back through and look at some of this stuff, right? So, so that's kind of an important point. And so I would say that's one of the things you really should be doing, and start with those basic personas again, go through, remap the customer journey based on the COVID reality, and, get a sense of where, what your customers care about and where they're coming from, at least over the next 6 to 8 months. Now, it might turn out that you can take the personas you did originally and use them again because everybody's back in the office. But, at least for the next 8 to 9 months, life is going to be a little different. We should take that into account.
That's a good point. Eric, I've had a great time with you today. Can you please share with the B2B DM gang how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. You can check out our website, www.BlueLeap, BLUELEAP.com, or you can also email me at eburgess, it's EBURGESS @BlueLeap.com. So always happy to talk.
Most definitely. And also, too, if you want to get more insights like this and you want to share it and you want other people to be part of this B2B DM gang community so that we can all learn from one another, make sure you go to iTunes and you subscribe, rate, and review this episode. Eric Burgess, thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.